Paul Michael LeMaitre disappears in the middle of a crowd on the 4th of July back in 2012 in the small town of Seward, Alaska. The 97th annual marathon race, known as Mount Marathon, was well underway when one of the runners, a man named Paul Michael LeMaitre, appeared to have suddenly vanished right there in the middle of a crowd of fellow runners, regarded as one of the most bizarre and unexplainable disappearances in Alaska. Mount Marathon officials have been struggling to explain what caused Paul's disappearance and how it could have been possible for one of the most experienced runners to vanish while taking a routine run through a very familiar area. According to the Missing 411 report, Paul Michael LeMaitre was 66 years old at the time of his disappearance. He was considered one of the most experienced runners of the event. Even more peculiar, Mount Marathon is one of the oldest and safest races in the United States. The marathon began back in 1915, and in the 97 years since its start, there hadn't been a single known injury or disappearance. The marathon is a 3-mile combination run that takes runners up Seward, Alaska's highest point, 3,000 feet of elevation, before bringing them back down to sea level. The race starts in downtown Seward at the corner of 4th Avenue and Adams Street, winds up to the summit, and comes back down, ending at the corner of 4th Avenue and Washington Street. After spending the entire year preparing, Paul told his family he planned to take his time, just hoping for a respectable finish. He wasn't trying to win. He didn't want to risk injury. Paul was described as incredibly physically fit by his co-workers at the Joint Military Base Elmendorf-Richardson, so his family thought nothing of it. He'd be fine. Paul worked as a counselor at the military base. He helped servicemen transition out of the military back into civilian life, focused on health and preparedness for every possible problem they might face. This alone shows Paul LeMaitre was someone who planned carefully and took care of himself. If anything had been wrong, he would have gotten the help he needed. Unfortunately for Paul, shortly after registering for the race and receiving bib number 548, he completely vanished. Just a few hours after the race began, according to the official search and rescue timeline. It was around 3 p.m. when Paul's family last saw him, standing at the starting line. Then, several hours later, at about 6 p.m., a race timing crew spotted Paul ascending the mountain and decided to do a quick interview with him for the post-race article. He looked great. He was talkative. When asked about the race, Paul, without hesitation, said he was feeling great and hoped to finish in the next few hours at a brisk walking pace. 5 days later, on July 9th, race officials published an article about the encounter. The chamber noted, a race timing crew stationed at the top of the mountain had begun their descent around 5:45 p.m. The lead timer, name not disclosed, had spoken with Paul at about 6 p.m. when he was nearing the top. The timer said Paul verbally confirmed he wanted to continue. It was believed Paul was the last runner to reach the mountaintop and should have been within view of a group of other runners and race officials nearby. But then, just minutes later, something strange happened. A bizarre accident occurred on the descent of the trail. Though few details are known, two runners fell in separate incidents and at different locations. Both had serious injuries. Neither could explain why they fell. And oddly, both had turned off into random areas of the trail, almost like they had jumped off the mountain's edge. Officials with the Chamber of Commerce, worried about the race's safety record, began investigating. But they couldn't explain the runners' strange behavior or why they'd left the trail. Then, at 8 p.m., Paul's wife contacted race officials. Paul had not returned. He was the only runner unaccounted for. She explained Paul had expected to finish by 7:30 p.m. and was now running over 30 minutes late. Because of the strange injuries earlier, race officials didn't waste time. They contacted the Seward Fire Department and the Alaska State Troopers immediately to start an urgent search of the mountain. Despite hundreds of volunteers searching every trail, and even using helicopters with thermal imaging and state-of-the-art cameras, no sign of Paul was ever found. Even stranger, as soon as the search began, a heavy fog suddenly blanketed the mountain. Search teams encountered 2 black bears, but aside from that, no wildlife. Nothing else. Rescue dogs picked up Paul's scent, but suddenly lost it halfway down the mountain. And just like that, no more leads. By July 9th, the Alaska Dispatch published an article summarizing the massive effort. Hundreds of volunteers have been involved in the rescue operation, including the Alaska Mountain Rescue, Nordic Ski Patrol, Alaska Search and Rescue Dogs, Bear Creek Volunteer Fire Department, National Park Service, Seward Police and Fire Department, the Air National Guard, Alaska State Troopers, and many local residents and racers who returned to help. But even with all that manpower,
I got called to search and rescue. A 66-year-old male went up over the top, last seen about 6 p.m. till about 9:30 right now. This is this man's first time running this mountain. Got a helo on standby. We're gonna have a spotter go up with him and see if they can find him.
We do have a last visual of him at the top of the mountain. These 2 cliff areas, this is a 300-foot drop right here, and this backside is vicious.
Paul Michael LeMaitre was never found. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. The official theory? As Paul climbed the mountain late in the day, his poor eyesight may have caused him to confuse the current year's path with a previous year's trail. Mount Marathon was known for changing its route every year to keep the course fresh for returning runners. So Paul may have accidentally veered off course and fallen off the mountain. Somewhere his body has still never been found. 2-year-old DeOrr Kunz Jr. vanished without a trace. On July 10th, 2015, he was on a camping trip with his parents at Timber Creek Campground, tucked away in the wilderness of Leadore, Idaho. What should have been a peaceful family outing turned into every parent's worst nightmare. DeOrr was with his mom, Jessica Mitchell, his dad, DeOrr Kunz Sr., his great-grandfather Robert Walton, and a family friend. The group had gone fishing. Jessica and Vernal thought little DeOrr was staying back with Grandpa Walton. But Grandpa Walton? He thought the boy had gone with his parents. By the time they realized no one had eyes on him, DeOrr was gone. The family launched into a frantic search, calling his name, scouring the campsite. But there was no sign of him. Soon, law enforcement, search and rescue teams, helicopters, and volunteers flooded the area. They searched forests, meadows, streams, and every inch of the rugged terrain for weeks, and found nothing. As the investigation moved forward, detectives noticed something wasn't right. There were gaps in Jessica and Vernal's stories, inconsistencies, and both of them failed polygraph tests. Still, there was no hard evidence. No charges were filed. They maintained they didn't know what happened and that their son must have simply vanished. They said DeOrr was walking with them toward the creek, but then turned around to go back to camp. That moment was the last time anyone ever saw him. DeOrr was wearing a pair of cowboy boots that were too big for his feet, boots that reportedly kept slipping off. Now think about this. If he'd been taken or attacked by an animal, wouldn't those boots have fallen off somewhere? But they were never found. Not a single trace. Since that day, his parents have split up and moved on with their lives. They even admitted publicly that either one of them could have been capable of harming their son. A chilling confession. But again, no charges, no evidence, just silence. To this day, the disappearance of DeOrr Kunz Jr. remains a mystery. No sightings, no clues. Just a little boy, gone without a trace in the woods of Idaho. 64-year-old Nita Mayo was a woman known for her keen sense of adventure and a vibrant love of life. Born in England, Nita moved to the United States after marrying her American husband, a man enlisted in the Air Force. Together, they built a life in Oklahoma, raising 4 children in a home full of road trips, laughter, and spontaneous adventures. Her daughter Tracy once shared, "Getting to know all the parts of the United States was something she enjoyed, and she loved scenery." For Nita's children, memories of their mother behind the wheel, chasing the open road, are treasures they still hold dear. Which makes what happened in the summer of 2005 all the more heartbreaking. Nita wasn't a novice. She was an experienced adventurer. And yet, she would become the center of one of the most mysterious missing 411 cases in recent memory. By 1990, with her children grown and out on their own, Nita relocated to Hawthorne, Nevada, where she started a new chapter as a nurse at Mount Grant General Hospital. She lived alone, worked hard, and was deeply respected by her co-workers. So when Nita didn't show up for work on August 9th, 2005, alarm bells immediately went off. The day before, August 8th, had been her day off. That morning, she had breakfast with a friend and mentioned her plan for the day, a solo trip to Sonora, California, which meant crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains via Sonora Pass on State Route 108. It was a long drive, about 175 miles, but easily doable in a day. At around 11 a.m., Nita said goodbye, got into her 1997 silver Mercury Sable station wagon, and headed west. She never came home. When her co-workers couldn't reach her the next day, they grew concerned. Calls went unanswered. One of them even drove to her house, and when they saw her car was gone, worry turned to fear. By that afternoon, Nita Mayo was reported missing. Authorities launched a search, retracing her route across the mountains. Nita had been in good spirits, healthy, both mentally and physically. There was no warning sign, nothing to suggest that anything was wrong. But then came a break in the case. On August 10th, just 2 days after she was last seen, deputies found her abandoned vehicle. It was parked at Donald Vista Overlook, just off Route 108, deep in the Stanislaus National Forest. The scene was chilling. The car was locked. Inside were her purse, car keys, cell phone, credit cards, and ID, untouched. Her prescription sunglasses and camera were the only items missing. Nita's family explained she preferred using the car's keypad entry system, so the locked doors didn't raise suspicion. Inside the car, deputies also found souvenirs from Strawberry, a nearby town, proof she had made it to Sonora before stopping at Donald Vista. But as for Nita herself, she was nowhere to be found. Search and rescue teams sprang into action. Sniffer dogs were deployed. but they couldn't pick up her trail. A California Highway Patrol helicopter equipped with infrared swept the 1,000-foot ravine below the overlook and the surrounding forest. But no signs of life were found. The search dragged into mid-August, and as the days passed, hope began to fade. After a week, the official search was called off. But for her family, the search had only just begun. Her children took to the streets, posting flyers in Hawthorne and Sonora, begging for leads, pleading for answers. A full forensic sweep of Nita's vehicle was conducted. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no indication of foul play. And yet, something didn't sit right. Some believe she may have slipped while taking photos at the overlook, accidentally falling down the sheer drop. Others, including her family, fear something much darker, that Nita may have been taken, that she could still be out there, somewhere. To this day, Nita Mayo's case remains unsolved. She is described as a white female, 5 feet 2 inches to 5 feet 3 inches, 140 to 150 pounds, brown hair, hazel eyes, and pierced ears. She was last seen wearing oval-shaped prescription glasses, a gold mother's ring, and a silver necklace with blue and pink stones. If you have any information about Nita Mayo's disappearance, please contact the Sheriff's Office at 1-800-2283592 and reference case number 052406. Because sometimes, even the most familiar roads can lead to the most unimaginable mysteries. Towering over the wide, open prairies of Montana, the crazy mountains rise like a jagged island of stone. A 35 by 15 mile range isolated from the Rockies, this rugged stretch of wilderness is home to more than 25 towering peaks that soar above 10,000 feet. And nestled among them, 40 pristine alpine lakes, hidden between steep slopes and jagged rock. This is mountain goat country, elk country, a place where wild animals roam and where hunters follow. In 2014, a 38-year-old experienced bow hunter named Hedges ventured into the crazies with 2 friends. They were elk hunting, and it wasn't their first time. The year before, they had stashed supplies in the area, near Sunlight Lake. And on this trip, Aaron set out to retrieve that cache. They started their journey from the Cottonwood Lake trailhead on the west side of the range. After setting up camp, Hedges hiked north along the trail in search of the gear they'd left behind. But something went wrong. While searching for the cache, Hedges radioed his friends. He'd missed his turn. They told him to head back up the trail, but that would be the last time anyone ever heard from him. From there, Aaron Hedges vanished without a trace, and for reasons that remain unclear. His hunting partners waited several days before reporting him missing. They've never been publicly identified, and some seasoned hunters have since questioned that delay. Though Hedges disappeared on September 7th, 2014, police weren't notified until September 10th, 3 days later, after his wife Christine filed the report. Apparently after being contacted by one of the other hunters. As soon as conditions allowed, a massive search operation began. Search teams poured into the crazy mountains, 20 K9 units, 59 ground searchers, helicopters with spotlights, night vision optics, and a high-elevation technical team. They searched tirelessly for 12 days, but found nothing. That fall, however, there was a breakthrough. Searchers found a small camp on the east side of the mountains. There they discovered a pair of boots, a hydration pack, and signs of a campfire. But this only deepened the mystery. First, that part of the range is covered in sharp, jagged rock. Going barefoot? Unthinkable, unless Hedges had a second pair of shoes in his pack. Second, the items were found on the opposite side of the range from where he disappeared. And traversing that kind of terrain would be a grueling journey, even for a seasoned outdoorsman like Aaron. Then, almost a year later, an unexpected development came from an unlikely source. Roger Beslanowicz, a butcher from Powell, Wyoming, was visiting family on their ranch near the east side of the Crazy Mountains. One day, while giving his son-in-law a ride to fix a fence, Roger was told about a scenic ridge nearby. He climbed it, and at the top, he spotted something unusual leaning against a tree: an orange hunting vest, a backpack, a bow, and clothing. At first, Roger figured it was just gear left behind by a frustrated cold hunter. He picked it up, planning to return it later. But when he got home, he checked the hunting license attached to the gear. It belonged to Aaron Hedges of Bozeman, Montana. He turned to his son-in-law and joked, "Any hunters go missing lately?" His son-in-law stared at him and just nodded. The location where the gear was found, miles outside of the legal hunting area, and about 6 miles from where searchers had discovered Aaron's boots the year before. That discovery prompted a renewed search. The Sweetgrass County Sheriff's Office launched a detailed grid search of the area. But again, nothing. Then, in 2016, human remains were finally found. Just a half-mile from where Beslanowicz had discovered the gear. Using dental records, they confirmed the identity. It was Aaron Hedges. His body had been just outside the original search zone, and just like that, the mystery seemed to end. But the questions, they only grew more disturbing. Why did Aaron veer off course long before the weather turned bad? Why did his hunting partners wait 3 days to report him missing? And why would he abandon his boots in a region full of razor-sharp stone? Most unsettling of all, how did Aaron end up 15 miles from where he was last seen, through some of the most treacherous terrain in Montana, without leaving any signs of injury or distress? Aaron Hedges was no amateur. He was experienced, prepared. He knew those mountains. And yet, somehow, he became hopelessly lost, and no one can explain why. She was fearless, independent, and full of life. To her mother, Lisa Sayers, Samantha was a force, strong-willed, spirited, and never one to back down from a challenge, even when life threw her a major one. As a teenager, Sam was diagnosed with alopecia, an autoimmune disorder that caused her to lose all her hair. For many, that kind of change would have been devastating. But Sam handled it with grace. She tried wigs for a while, but they didn't feel like her. So, she ditched them and walked through the world bald, proud, and unapologetically herself. Sam had a passion for the outdoors, hiking, exploring, finding peace in nature. After earning a master's degree in technical theater design and technology from the State University of New York, she made the move to Seattle to start a new chapter. And that's where she met Kevin Dares, a single father of 3. They matched on Tinder, and what started as a spark quickly turned into something serious. They bonded over shared weekend hikes and adventures in the mountains around Washington. But in August 2018, one solo hike would change everything. On the morning of August 1st, Samantha told Kevin she was heading out on her own to hike Vesper Peak, a strenuous trail in the North Cascades National Park. She had hiked it before. She knew the terrain, and she promised she'd be back by evening. Kevin couldn't join her that day. He had to work. But he wasn't worried. Sam was capable and prepared. Before she left, he sent her a simple message. "Be safe. SOS me if anything goes haywire." That was the last communication they'd ever share. Sam drove her blue Ford Fiesta to the Sunrise Mine trailhead, where other hikers later confirmed seeing her car. She signed the trail log and began her ascent, climbing more than 4,000 feet to the summit of Vesper Peak. Around 3 p.m., she was seen by another hiker at the top, calmly eating her lunch. But shortly after beginning her descent, Samantha vanished. When 6 p.m. came and went, and she still wasn't home, Kevin grew anxious. He drove straight to the trailhead. Sam's car was still parked where she'd left it, but she was gone. He searched the trail that night on his own, calling her name, hoping she might appear, but she didn't. By the next morning, Samantha Sayers was officially reported missing. Search and rescue teams launched a massive operation covering rugged terrain and steep drops. Helicopters with infrared sensors combed the area from the sky. Ground crews and scent dogs worked tirelessly for 22 days. Still, no trace, no gear, no phone signal, no remains. Only her name in the trail register and the car she left behind. Investigators believe Sam may have fallen or gotten lost in a remote area, injured and unable to signal for help. But her mother, Lisa, isn't convinced. She's voiced her suspicions publicly, believing that her daughter might have been the victim of foul play or even human trafficking. In particular, Lisa has raised concerns about Kevin, though no evidence has ever supported those claims. Authorities maintain that there's no indication of a crime, just a tragic accident in dangerous terrain. But for Sam's family and those who followed the case closely, the mystery runs deeper. How could someone so experienced, so cautious, just disappear without a trace? To this day, Samantha Sayers remains missing. She is described as 27 years old at the time, 5 feet 8 inches, 125 pounds bald, with green eyes, a tattoo of stars on a vine. She was last seen wearing a green sports bra and gray hiking pants. If you have any information, please contact Detective Kendra Conley with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office at 4253-883-839 and reference case number 2018-107945, because somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Samantha Sayers. The Mount Hood National Forest, a place of towering trees, deep wilderness, and quiet mystery. Over the years, it's been the site of many disappearances, and tragically, many of those who vanished here have never been found. One such case is that of 57-year-old Robert Bissell, a soft-spoken man from Portland, Oregon, whose deep love for the outdoors led him into the roaring river wilderness in the summer of 2010. A trip from which he would never return. Robert's story begins in July of 2010, when he made his way to Estacada, Oregon, with plans to camp alone in the roaring river wilderness area. He was no stranger to the wild, an experienced outdoorsman, someone who truly valued solitude. But unlike many hikers, Robert almost always ventured out alone, a decision that wilderness experts often warn against. Still, his passion for fishing, hiking, and being alone with nature never wavered. After arriving in the area, Robert filed for a wilderness use permit. and told the U.S. Forest Service that he planned to be out until July 16th. From there, he drove to Trailhead 700, not far from Rock Lakes, and set off on his hike. He walked about 5 miles before setting up camp not far from Trail 512. But he wouldn't stay there for long. It's believed Robert went out on another hike, possibly to go fishing. His campsite was later discovered, and it looked as though he had only planned to be away for a few hours, maybe a day. His sleeping bag, his gear, most of his belongings were all still there. The only things missing? His fishing rod and his tackle. When Robert hadn't returned by July 16th, his brother became concerned. He made 2 separate trips to the area, on July 19th and again on the 24th. But there was no sign of Robert. That's when a missing person report was officially filed. Over the next 8 days, search crews from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office launched a wide-ranging operation through the wilderness. They searched the Roaring River Wilderness, the Rock Lake Basin, and Serene Lake. They even expanded into Shining Lake and Shell Rock Lake. But despite their best efforts, nothing was found. A few campers later reported seeing Robert in the area before he disappeared. They said he seemed to be in good spirits and had just arrived. He even left behind a note saying he was headed into the wilderness to do some trout fishing and that he'd be back soon. Searchers remained hopeful. The weather had been mild, even cool at times, and Robert was no stranger to the outdoors. But even with the help of hundreds of volunteers and professional search teams, Robert Bissell was never seen again. To this day, his disappearance remains a mystery. And like so many others who have stepped into the forest, he was never found. If you have any information that could help investigators, don't hesitate to contact the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office at 503-785-5000. 48-year-old Jerry Lee McCoen wasn't just another man who loved the outdoors. He was born into it. He'd spent his entire life on his family's farm in Oregon, working alongside his parents and tending to the day-to-day responsibilities of rural life. The animals, the open skies, the quiet peace of nature. This wasn't just a hobby for Jerry. It was home. Even as an adult, Jerry's passion for hiking and hunting never faded. But one ordinary day, that passion led to a mystery that still haunts the Oregon-California border. September 21st, 2002. It started like any other morning on the McCoen farm. The chickens were already up, crowing with the sunrise. The livestock stirred, waiting eagerly for their morning feed. At 5:30 a.m., Jerry climbed into his brown and white GMC pickup and headed down the driveway of their home on Old Mullen Highway. His family assumed he was off on another early morning hunting trip, like he'd done so many times before. But there was something off. Whenever Jerry left the farm, he'd always leave a note, something simple, just saying where he was going and when he'd be back. But that day, there was no note, no message, no word. At first, his parents, Bertha and Clifford, figured he'd just forgotten. But as the hours passed, worry began to set in. Jerry wasn't just some hobbyist. He was a proficient hunter. He'd been hunting since he was a child. One friend even described him as the ultimate outdoorsman. He's very knowledgeable about the woods, and he'd be home unless something went seriously wrong. It's believed Jerry was headed to Doherty Slide Snowmobile Park, across the state line in California. The forested terrain there was perfect for bow hunting, Jerry's preferred method. And that morning, he'd taken his bow with him, But as daylight faded and Jerry didn't return, his parents grew increasingly alarmed. He was responsible. He always checked in, and now he was missing. They contacted local authorities and officially reported Jerry Lee McCoen as missing. The investigation began immediately, but without a note or destination, authorities were operating on guesses. They considered several possible locations: Klamath Marsh, Gearhart Wilderness, Christmas Valley, and the Gearhart Mountains. Friends, family, and neighbors threw themselves to the search. Merrill and Malin, small Oregon towns with close-knit communities, came together to find Jerry. Search and rescue teams scoured the area on foot. Volunteers combed the forest. 4 airplanes took to the skies to help with the search. But despite every effort, there was no sign of him. Then, on October 8th, 2002, more than 2 weeks after Jerry disappeared, investigators made a disturbing discovery. Jerry's pickup truck was found abandoned. It was tucked deep inside the Daugherty Snowmobile Park off Medco Lake Road, surrounded by heavy forest. The truck was locked, the radio was off, and, strangely, the heat had been set to high. Something didn't feel right. To Jerry's parents, this wasn't just an abandoned vehicle. It was a sign that something terrible had happened. Like much of the community, Bertha and Clifford believed Jerry met with foul play. To this day, it's unclear whether his bow and arrows were ever found in the truck, or if they're still missing. The investigation remains open, but with so few leads, it stalled. Jerry Lee McCoen is described as a white male with blonde or strawberry blonde hair, hazel eyes, standing 6 feet tall, and weighing around 190 pounds. If you have any information about his disappearance, even the smallest detail, please contact 541-883-5130 and reference case number 022910. A man who knew the land better than most. A hunter, a farmer, a son, and a disappearance that still leaves a community searching for answers. The case of 18-year-old Daylin Pua's disappearance serves as a chilling reminder that some places in the wilderness are marked off-limits for a reason. And sometimes, ignoring those warnings can be a deadly mistake. Daylin, better known to his friends and family as Mock, was from South Kona on Hawaii's Big Island. A bright young man with big dreams. He had plans to become a pastry chef after finishing high school. In his free time, he loved photography, being in the outdoors, and spending time at the beach. On the 27th of February, 2015, he was visiting his grandmother on the island of Oahu. And for reasons that still aren't entirely clear, he decided that he wanted to hike the Haiku Stairs. Locals call it the Stairway to Heaven. It's a trail that's become infamous, not just for its breathtaking views, but because it's been closed to the public for years due to how extremely dangerous it is. Daylin told his grandmother about his plans. She begged him not to go, but he was adamant. That morning, he was seen boarding a bus, his destination, the Forbidden Trail. The hike began without incident. Daylin even took several photos along the way, which he later posted to social media. But that evening, he never came back, and when night fell and he still hadn't returned as promised, his family reported him missing. Investigators quickly pieced together what had happened. They learned that Daylin had promised his grandmother he wouldn't actually go on the trail, but he'd gone anyway. To figure out where he might have gone, authorities studied the photos he'd taken. And in one image, they notice something unsettling. In the background, a man can be seen, lingering in the brush. He's partially hidden by foliage, and it's likely that Daylen never even saw him. This discovery sparked a wave of speculation. Some believe the man may have been following Daylen, that he could have been attacked or even abducted. Daylen's family has long believed that the man in the photo wasn't just a bystander. But the truth? It's never been proven. There's always the chance that the man was just another hiker, on the trail illegally, who chose not to come forward for fear of being prosecuted. But since that man has never identified himself, his presence remains a disturbing mystery. Search efforts were further hampered by heavy rain, which made the already dangerous stairs slippery and even more treacherous. At one point, a group of hikers reported hearing someone calling for help, but they couldn't locate the voice. Those same hikers later returned to help with the search, but the voice was never heard again. And Daylen Pua was never found. It's believed that he may have slipped on the perilous trail, fallen into an unseen ravine or crevice, and ultimately succumbed to the elements. To this day, his case remains unsolved, a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly a dream or a hike can turn into a nightmare. If you have any information about Daylen Pua's disappearance, please contact the Honolulu Police Department at 8085-293-111. When 25-year-old David O'Sullivan boarded a flight from Ireland to the United States, he was chasing something bigger than adventure. He was chasing a dream. David had always wanted to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, a legendary trek that stretches from the border of California and Mexico all the way to the edge of Canada. It's 2,653 miles of mountain passes, desert trails, snow-covered peaks, and vast wilderness. He was inspired by the book Wild, written by Cheryl Strayed, later adapted into a film starring Reese Witherspoon. That story lit a fire in him, and in the spring of 2017, David finally set out on his own journey. Before leaving, David had just finished his studies at University College Cork, earning a degree in philosophy and English. He worked at a gas station in Middleton, saving every cent he could. He was disciplined, focused, and by all accounts, an experienced hiker, familiar with Ireland's rugged terrain. In early April, David made it to Idlewild, a quiet town nestled in Riverside County, California. He sent an email to his family, letting them know he was safe. He was restocking supplies, in good spirits, and ready to continue. But what lay ahead was far more dangerous than anything he'd faced back home. See, the mountains he was about to face, the San Jacinto Mountains, are no joke. Snowfall in the area had reached up to 3 feet, and while David was prepared for some cold weather, he might not have been ready for high-altitude snow conditions. Another hiker who crossed paths with him described David as looking worn down, exhausted. They advised him, "Don't push it. Go only as far as you feel safe." But David pressed on. On April 7th, he continued into the mountains. That was the last time anyone ever heard from him. At first, his family wasn't alarmed. David had warned them that there might be long stretches without contact. But when May came, and still no word, they knew something was wrong. They contacted police back in Ireland. But from thousands of miles away, there was little they could do. They turned to the internet, posting in Pacific Crest Trail Facebook groups, hoping someone had seen him. But there was no reply. They contacted the Irish consulate. A missing persons case was opened, Search teams were deployed along parts of the trail, but still, no gear, no clues, no David. Some people speculated that he disappeared intentionally, but that doesn't fit. David was seen hiking. He was excited, he had plans, dreams, and he was right in the middle of living one of them. To this day, no one knows what happened to David OSullivan. He set out on a path of self-discovery, courage, and freedom. And somewhere along that trail, he vanished. While people disappearing from national parks and remote wilderness isn't exactly new, some cases carry an air of mystery that's impossible to shake. And the disappearance of 69-year-old Sylvia Apps back on July 8th, 2014, is one of those cases. Sylvia was no stranger to the wild. She lived in Courtenay, British Columbia, Canada, and had planned a solo 5-day hiking trip through Strathcona Provincial Park on Vancouver Island. She wasn't a novice. She was an experienced hiker, well-prepared, equipped with safety gear, navigation tools, and the kind of know-how that comes from years of trail experience. Her family? They weren't worried. She'd done this kind of thing before. Before she left, she told them she'd be home by 4 p.m. on July 13th. But that return never happened. When Sylvia failed to come home, a massive search operation was launched. Crews from multiple organizations, aided by helicopters, combed the area around Castle Crag Mountain, where she was believed to be hiking. They covered the most likely routes. They searched the ridgelines, the valleys, the summit, but they found nothing, not a single trace. Eventually, it was confirmed that Sylvia had made it to the summit of Castle Crag. How do we know? She signed the register at the top on July 10th. But here's the strange part. No one saw her, no hikers, no campers, no one to say which direction she went next. The trail just seemed to end. The search lasted a week, but with no clues and fading hope of survival. The efforts were scaled back. Still, searchers said something odd. They felt like they were always just on the edge of finding her, like she was nearby, just out of reach. But each time, they came up empty. Then, a breakthrough. Mid-July, Sylvia's backpack was found, and inside, all of her belongings, except for 2 things: her walking poles and her camera. Later, those items were found too, but in a completely different location. It's been speculated that she may have dropped them, then spent time backtracking, trying to recover them. But still, no Sylvia. For the Comox Valley Search and Rescue Team, this case was a first. They'd never worked to search where all of the gear was found, but not the person. For her family, each discovery brought a spark of hope. Maybe she was alive. Maybe they'd finally bring her home. But each time, the trail went cold. To this day, Sylvia Apps remains missing. No further evidence has ever been uncovered. The RCMP and the Comox Valley Search and Rescue continue to ask for the public's help. If you know anything, even the smallest detail, you're urged to contact them at 250-338-1321. Because sometimes, even the most experienced hikers vanish without a trace. The disappearance of 28-year-old Jessica Stacks is a case filled with strange twists and turns. But it's also one that, to this day, remains unsolved. It all began when Jessica and her boyfriend, 45-year-old Jerry Baggett, celebrated New Year's Day on a flat-bottom boat on the Tallahatchie River in Mississippi. Now, the details of what happened that day. They're vague, at best. mostly because Jerry has changed his story more than once, leading many to believe he's been less than truthful, for reasons still unknown. The case started on January 1st, 2021, when Jessica and Jerry got into his truck and towed a boat to the river. We know this happened because security cameras at the Peeville Quick Stop convenience store caught them on video around 5:30 that morning, driving through the area. They were planning to go out on the river to look for deer and wild hogs, animals that sometimes get trapped when the area floods, and to enjoy the unexpectedly warm weather. They launched their boat at County Road 46, intending to float about 4 miles downstream to the Rocky Ford Bridge. But they had no way to get back. So they left Jessica's phone with one of her friends, planning to call her for a ride when they were done. Now here's where it starts to get murky. According to Jerry, Jessica became concerned as soon as they got on the water. The river, she noticed, was flowing much faster than usual. About 2 miles downstream, she told him to take the boat to shore so she could get out. Jerry says he did exactly that. He let her off on dry land. Jessica then said she'd walk back to County Road 46. He claims he floated to the opposite bank, got out, and called a friend to come get him. But when Jessica hadn't called her friend by 10:15 that night, she was reported missing. Strangely, Jerry was not the one who made that call. A search began right away, but by 2 a.m., with no sign of her, it was temporarily called off. At sunrise, the search resumed. But by that time, flooding in the area made things even harder. The following day, things took an even stranger turn. Some of Jessica's belongings were found, along with her footprints, just inside the border of Holly Springs National Forest. Searchers followed the tracks. They led to County Road 46. But then, they suddenly turned north, heading toward Highway 30. No one knows why. The tracks led into a newly flooded field, and that's where they stopped. Later on, a pair of women's boots, with their tops cut off, were found, along with a shovel with a broken handle. It's still uncertain whether these belong to Jessica. But one thing is known. Jessica and Jerry were reportedly using shovels instead of oars that day. Then, Jerry changed his story again. He told investigators that the boat had started taking on water, that they stopped at the shore to empty some of it, and that the boat suddenly drifted off, unintentionally leaving Jessica behind. But some have speculated that Jessica was never in that truck to begin with, and that Jerry knows more than he's saying. Jessica has never been found, and her case remains open. If you have any information that might help, please contact the Union County Sheriff's Office at 662-534-1943. Jonathan Aljay was no ordinary cop. He was a K-9 unit handler, a SWAT operator, and a man with 18 years of experience in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. At 6 feet tall, built like a brick wall, Jonathan was the kind of guy you'd never want to cross. He was cool under pressure, the type who could walk into chaos and walk out in control. Before joining the force, Jonathan had served as a paratrooper in the Special Forces. His friends called him tough as nails. He'd been in gunfights, served high-risk warrants, and once scared off a 500-pound black bear during a camping trip. Yeah, Jonathan could handle himself. It was Thursday, June 11th, 1998. In just 2 weeks, Jonathan would finally compete in the Western States 100-mile endurance run. A brutal race he'd been training for years to qualify for. To prepare, He often ran trails through the Devil's Punch Bowl, a remote, rugged area in California's Antelope Valley. He knew it well. He'd spent countless hours hiking there. It was one of his favorite places. That morning, around 11:45 a.m., he arrived, parked his truck, pulled a sunshade across the windshield, and set off. Not long into his run, he bumped into a teacher and a group of students, folks he'd met before during a school talk. He told them he was heading to the summit of Mount Baden-Powell, a 9,400-foot climb, and would be back by sunset. But he wouldn't be. Sometime that evening, around 6 p.m., 2 camp employees spotted Jonathan still making his way up the mountain. Later, a 3rd employee noticed a man carrying a green backpack heading toward the parking lot. Around that same time, a local resident reported hearing a single gunshot echo from the Punch Bowl. At 11 p.m., when Jonathan didn't return home, his wife started to worry. She called the authorities. By 11:30, a search and rescue operation was underway. His truck was still there. No signs of tampering, no clues, no Jonathan. Most assumed he was fine. Maybe he'd twisted an ankle. He'd come limping back like he always did. But 24 hours passed, then 48. No sign of him. By day 3, the operation ramped up. Helicopters, K9s, thermal imaging, ATVs, infrared scans of ravines and caves. Still, nothing. The day of the 100-mile race came and went, but Jonathan never showed. So what did happen to him? There are theories. Let's take a look. Theory 1. Someone took Jonathan's life. As a deputy, and a SWAT one at that, Jonathan had made enemies. But that comes with a badge, right? Still, the gunshot heard in the Punch Bowl that night, that's hard to ignore. And then, there's this. An informant later claimed Jonathan stumbled upon something that day. Something dangerous. He was going to be a hero, the source said. But instead, he was taken care of. Put in a hole. Was he a victim of criminal activity? Or worse, a victim of police corruption? Later investigations revealed that several meth labs were operating in the area, and a few corrupt officers were caught protecting them in exchange for cash. Jonathan, by all accounts, was honest. Maybe too honest. Maybe he knew too much. One officer, Darren Hager, was kicked off the force for trying to look into whether any cops were behind Jonathan's disappearance. Then there's the second theory, suicide. Before heading out that morning, Jonathan turned to his wife and said, "Have a nice life. Tell our daughter Chloe I love her." At the time, she thought he was just ending the marriage. Now, she's not so sure. They were headed for divorce. He was unhappy. Could that have been a goodbye? His family doesn't think so. His colleagues don't either. They say Jonathan was a survivor, that he loved his daughter more than anything, that ending his life didn't fit the man they knew. Which brings us to the third theory. Maybe Jonathan didn't die at all. Maybe he chose to vanish. His sister believes that. She says he was done with California, that he was ready to go. She believes he'd been saving money, crafting a new identity, and that June 11th, 1998, was the day he walked away. Some think he may have returned to the military for a covert mission. Others say he's living in Alaska, off the grid, finally free. To this day, no remains have been found. No trace, no answers. Just a truck left behind in the desert, a haunting goodbye, and a trail that leads nowhere. Whatever happened to Jonathan O.J.? One thing is clear. He was a man prepared for the worst. a man no one expected to just disappear. And yet, he did. The disappearance of 71-year-old Brian Lee Johnston is yet another case of someone vanishing without a trace in one of America's national parks. This time, it was Olympic National Park in Washington State. It was August of 2013. And Brian had planned to spend 3 days hiking the OSullivan Loop Trail. According to his wife, she woke up on the morning of August 2nd to find a note from Brian. In it, he explained that he didn't want to wake her. He was heading out early, driving from their home in Seattle to the park, just to spend some time in nature. The OSullivan Loop Trail consists of three 3-mile sections. It's not known to be difficult, and it wouldn't have been a challenge for Brian. He was in good shape, physically fit, and he'd spent a lot of his life out in the wilderness. But when he hadn't returned home by August 28th, his wife and family knew something was wrong. They filed a missing persons report. At first, there wasn't too much concern. After all, the trail is well traveled, and people don't usually get lost out there. But as the search began, that sense of calm quickly faded. For the next 3 days, around 50 people, including park rangers, scoured the area. Still, no sign of Brian. And though the trail itself isn't long, it soon became clear. Something had gone very wrong. His truck was still parked at the OSullivan trailhead, suggesting he had, in fact, entered the area. But despite search efforts, no footprints, no gear, no clothing, nothing was found. Eventually, the search was called off. Some suggested that Brian may have intentionally disappeared, that he simply walked away from the trail and from his life. But his family strongly disagrees. They say Brian hadn't been having any problems at home. There was no sign he wanted to leave, no reason to vanish. Still, some pointed out that Brian was a quiet man, very reserved, someone who enjoyed solitude. And because of that, no one really knows what was going through his mind when he set off that morning. Some think he may have gotten bored with the trail and ventured onto another. Maybe he got lost or injured and simply couldn't make it back. Others believe he may have changed plans entirely, deciding to hike somewhere else before ever reaching the OSullivan Loop. But the truth is, no one knows. No evidence has ever surfaced to support any of these theories. Brian's disappearance continues to baffle investigators, and his story remains one of the many eerie cases of people who go into the wild and are never seen again. If you saw Brian on the trail back in August 2013, or have any information about his whereabouts, please contact Olympic National Park Rangers at 36056-53120.